Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Case for Pro-Life presentation. My name is Kylie Armstrong, and I'm the Ministry Operations Assistant for Culture of Life Family Services.
And I'm Ariana Allen, and I'm the Education Coordinator also at COLS.
So this is part one of two presentations, and this part is going to go over the church teaching on pro-life, just getting an overall understanding of the issue. We're going to talk about the historical backdrop for the legalization of birth control and abortion in our country, and just how these things have affected the world that we live in. This is the general outlook of pro-life and what it means to be pro-life. So this means being against abortion and euthanasia, which is assisted suicide, and the death penalty. Being opposed to abortion in all circumstances, believing that the right to life is the most fundamental human right, believing that human life begins at conception and that unborn children are entitled to the same rights as the mother. We do want to provide a scriptural foundation to this presentation and our understanding of the human person. So we want to start with this quote from Jeremiah. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I set you apart."
Yeah, so God is saying in this quote that you have a mission that is particular to you and that only you can fulfill. And that is kind of what we want you to think about as we move through this presentation. So we also want to understand pro-life from a Catholic perspective. So one of the best ways we can do this is by reading the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which just says what we believe. So our quote is, "Human life is sacred because from its beginning it involves the creative action of God, and that life remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator, who is its sole end. God alone is the Lord of life from its beginning until its end. No one can, under any circumstance, claim for himself the right directly to destroy an innocent human being."
So this paragraph from the Catechism ultimately says that every human person is intentionally created by God and is precious in his eyes, that he makes no mistakes. And being pro-life is not just pro-birth, which I think is a misconception that people have about those who carry the pro-life belief. And just to kind of contextualize what it means to be pro-life as a Catholic, I want you to picture Mother Teresa, who she was extremely pro-life and advocated for the unborn and was very vocal about her views on abortion. But she ministered to people of all ages in all circumstances. And so the way that she cared for others in every walk of life just gives us the understanding of how we're called to serve people based on our pro-life beliefs in this sanctity of each human life.
Yeah, so the church says that human life must never be neglected, exploited, demeaned, or contracepted, and she will always stand for that. So the church believes that the family is the building block of society and that married couples are called to bring life into the world according to God's plan. So that means that children are very important to God's plan for marriage. And as such, the Catholic Church advocates for something called natural family planning, which is the church's choice for spacing children. So the church isn't saying that you have to have 1,000 kids that you haven't planned for and possibly cannot afford to care for. The church is saying that you can use natural family planning to space your children by tracking the wife's fertility cycle and identifying times when she is fertile and infertile and planning accordingly.
In order to understand pro-life, it's essential that we understand the human person in their fullness. And so to give us a deeper understanding of how God created human beings, we're going to look at St. John Paul II's theology of the body. And in this theology, he analyzes the book of Genesis and looks at Adam and Eve, the relationship that they have with one another and the relationship they have with God, and how this provides a blueprint for how we can understand how God created us as man and woman. So first and foremost, that God creates man and woman in his image and likeness. He created us as man and woman distinctly. He created us with infinite worth and dignity and as his beloved children. He created us for relationship with one another and for relationship with him. And being created for relationship is us being created in the image and likeness of God, because God is relationship. He is Trinity. He's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and has that exchange of love within himself. And that's what we're called to share in our relationships. And finally, he creates us with free will, which means we have the ability to choose to love someone or to not. And that's the important thing to keep in mind, that love is a free choice. God didn't want to force us into relationship with him. He wanted us to freely choose it so we could understand what it means to have true love.
Yeah, so something else that John Paul II talks about in the Theology of the Body is the spousal meaning of the body. So men and women are created complementary and equal, meaning that they have different strengths that work together to help them grow as a unit, and that they are equal, that one does not lord over the other. So we see this in Genesis when God creates woman from the rib of man. He doesn't create woman from the head of man or from the foot of man, meaning she's not to lord over him or be trod under his foot. They are supposed to be partners and work together as partners with their masculine and feminine strengths, building each other up. So we can see from this that the body reveals the person. The masculine body is very strong and sturdy, and from that we can see that the masculine side is to provide and care for, while the feminine, her entire body is oriented towards caring for and nourishing the life of a child. So we can see that she is to bear life. And when we see these two work together, the masculine protecting and providing and the feminine caring life and nurturing, we see a beautiful family unit and how they fit together and what the relationship between man and woman is supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Adam sees Eve for the first time, he says, "At last, this one is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And he sees her body, and in her nakedness, he sees that their bodies are created to fit together. But he sees her in her fullness. He sees her heart and her soul. Um, and in that, he understands that he's now found somebody to give his life to. And he sees that that is who Eve is, somebody he's going to lay his life down for, because before he named all the creatures and saw that none of them were like him. And so Eve is created to be his partner and somebody that he's going to completely give himself to, which is why it was such a cause for joy for him to encounter her for the first time. And this is God's plan for human sexuality, that it's intended to be a life-giving and mutual gift of self. One, it's meant to be free. Free meaning that true love that comes with when you freely choose to be with somebody, a total gift in giving your entire body to somebody, but also your heart and your soul, that total nakedness of who you are. Human sexuality is meant to be faithful. That's between two people, because in that commitment is where you have the full freedom to love and to give of yourself. And ultimately, this union is so powerful that it's meant to be fruitful, that man and woman join together and they actually have the ability to share in God's creative power, and that new life can come forth from this union. And so all of this to say that Adam and Eve, they were naked, but they felt no shame because they saw each other the way that God sees them. And they understood that their sexuality had this greater purpose to join together in the deepest relationship possible. And then they would glorify God in it, that they could bring life forth from their union. So fast forward a little bit, the serpent enters the garden, tempts Eve with the fruit, and then their eyes are opened and they see that they're naked. And in this moment, they see now just the body. They no longer see the whole person in the heart and the soul. They see just the body. And now they desire to use the other for sexual gratification. And so when they recognize this desire to use, they feel shame and they feel bad about this. So they cover themselves, and they've now concealed part of themselves to the other. So this means that the fall has distorted human sexuality into use, exploitation, and objectification. They no longer see each other the way that God sees them. They see each other as a part. And so they have this shame in their relationship.
Yeah, and another result of the fall is like what Kylie was talking about, there was a unity of body and soul prior to the fall, right? Like you are a body and a soul. You're not just a soul that happens to be inside of a body. You are your body and your soul together. But at the fall, there became disunity with this, and the body began to be seen as bad and the soul as good, creating disunity, not just within the person, but within the relationships of men and women. So lust and enmity were able to enter the world in the relationships between man and woman. And now true intimacy is lost with each other and with God in the way that we used to have it prior to the fall. So this leads into Adam's role in the garden. Often, I think when this story is talked about, it's talked about how woman messed everything up and Eve ruined everything. But that's not so. Adam also had a role in the garden. In the beginning, God told Adam to guard and care for the Garden of Eden. And Eve was one of the creatures within that garden. She was God's great gift to Adam, and he was meant to protect her as well as the garden. However, the serpent entered the garden, which means that Adam wasn't fulfilling his role as the protector. And the serpent tempted Eve, and then she handed the fruit to Adam, meaning that Adam was standing there idly by while the serpent was tempting his wife, and he was being tempted as well. So Adam's job was to protect, and he did not fulfill that. But when God comes and talks to them about what happened, Adam turns it around and blames everything on Eve, saying, "The woman you gave to me," which in a way is also him trying to blame God for this great gift that was given to him, when really Adam did not fulfill his responsibilities and his mission as a man.
Yeah. So this was not isolated to the Garden of Eden. We now see this everywhere. So just to provide this idea some modern context, Barack Obama, during his 2008 election campaign, was asked, "When do you believe life begins?" And he says that knowing when life begins is above my pay grade. And this is kind of a subtle way to brush off the question, because obviously abortion is a very serious issue. But this is a perfect example of men standing by idly because they want to respect women and they want to let them decide what they do with their bodies, and they don't want to try to have control over them. But men not advocating for women in having everything that she needs to care for a child in an unplanned pregnancy is men failing in their role to guard and take care of women. Because abortion sidesteps the needs of women. It says you can't take care of the child and the child is an inconvenience, so you need to get rid of it. But what women actually need are support in the workplace and with childcare, and to receive the resources and the love and care she needs to care for this child, even though it wasn't a part of her plan. And so abortion allows men to step back and let the women take care of it, when he should be rising to the occasion and protecting her and caring for her in this vulnerable time. So abortion very much involves men just as much as it involves women. And it's really important, men, that you understand that it is your duty and your role to care for women in these vulnerable spots, and especially in abortion, because it's not just caring for that woman, it's caring for the child who could be your child or your sister. And I really want you to think about how this truly will affects you very deeply. So Humanae Vitae, which means of human life, this is an encyclical letter that was written by Pope Paul VI on July 25th, 1968. And Pope Paul VI writes this letter during the sexual revolution and when birth control has just been legalized for married couples to use.
So the craziest thing to me about this letter is how prophetic Paul VI is. He warns of the deterioration of the relationship between men and women and the overall treatment of women if artificial birth control becomes widely used. And he says that based on this, he predicts that there will be an increase in divorce divorce, infidelity, and promiscuity, because people will see themselves as lords over their own body, meaning that they think that they can control everything about their body, and that they are in control of everything that results from their actions. So he goes on to say that another effect that gives cause for alarm is that a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman and disregard her physical and emotional equilibrium, reducing her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner whom he should surround with care and affection. And does this not go directly back to what we just talked about with the Garden of Eden? Man is now disregarding that woman is his partner and that he should surround her with care and love and care for who she is as a whole person, and now is reducing her down to her body and how her body can be used for his own pleasure.
So we just want to go a little bit deeper in artificial birth control and how this all started. So the concept of birth control was initiated by a woman named Margaret Sanger in 1914. She worked as a nurse in Brooklyn, and she worked with people that lived in poor communities and continued to have children that they struggled to care for. And so she thought that if women had the ability to control their fertility, then they wouldn't be able to reproduce, and therefore that they would be better off because they had less children in these impoverished circumstances. So she backed this idea called eugenics, which is essentially controlling certain populations of people reproducing in order to create an improved human race. And so she believed this applied to the minority groups of people she was working with, and she also believed that this applied to people with physical and mental illnesses. And this idea that she had in some of the people that she was in communication with was actually borrowed by the Nazis in Germany in their idea of the master race and only certain people that should be allowed to live and that are better than others. So Sanger would then go on to found Planned Parenthood later in her life, just a side note. So she establishes the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn in 1916. And Margaret Sanger promoted multiple different kinds of birth control, but she was always looking for that one magic pill that a woman could take to be in control of her fertility. So in 1951, she recruits human reproductive expert George Pincus to develop this birth control pill. He develops the first oral contraceptive. It is approved by the FDA in 1960. It's legalized by the Supreme Court for married couples to use in 1965 and for everybody else in 1972. So this is a period of human history, American history, that is coinciding with what Pope Paul VI wrote about in Humanae Vitae and the legalization of birth control. And this happens right alongside it. And this is the sexual revolution. So this is during the 1960s, and think sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's what was going on in this period. So there is an emphasis of individual fulfillment over the family structure.
So the pill largely contributed to this because women think that they have greater control over their bodies, that they can have sex without consequences, and that they have freedom of sexual expression. They basically took all of the things that were not virtuous about the way that some men were acting and basically said, well, now I can act that way as well. There are no consequences for sex for me either. And this created a culture of singleness and casual sex and began the integration of sex into pop culture in the mass media and TV. Playboy and pornography entered and became more prevalent. Believe it or not, the way that our media portrays women and uses women to sell various products on television and just in ads in general, it did not used to be this way. And this is when that began.
So this next quote is from Linda Gordon, who she was a pro-choice feminist back in the 1970s, and she wrote about the history of birth control. And she says that the rejection of marriage, of the traditional family, of propriety in dress and behavior can all be traced to the normalization of contraception. So what Ari was saying, that now women have no consequences of sex either. Before, pregnancy was the natural consequence of sex. Now, because of contraception, a woman doesn't have to worry about getting pregnant. So society begins to adopt this contraceptive mindset. Free sex, no consequences. So then imagine a woman is using contraception and then she does get pregnant and the contraception fails. Well, there wasn't an openness to life to begin with. So now she wants to get rid of the pregnancy. And this is where we see an increase of illegal abortions in our country, because abortion is now being used as a backup birth control. And this brings us into Roe versus Wade, which is the Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion in all 50 states in 1973, very shortly after birth control was legalized. This case was prompted by a woman named Norma McCorvey, who's from Texas and who was pregnant with her third child that was unwanted. She had placed her first two children up for adoption, and she was now fighting to have an abortion for this child, but it was illegal in Texas at the time. And so her case was actually picked up by pro-abortion lawyers and taken all the way to the Supreme Court. And just a side note that McCorvey, she did give birth to that child and place that child up for adoption as well. But she did actually ultimately convert to Catholicism, and she spent the last years of her life trying to undo this law that was put in place in her name, and became a pro-life advocate. So Roe versus Wade declared the right to abortion implicit to the 14th Amendment, which is the right to privacy. The court ruled that abortion must be permitted for any reason a woman chooses until the child becomes viable, and viability is defined as the ability for the child to survive outside of the womb. So legally, this is about 25 weeks or the start of the third trimester that it had defined during this case. But now we're actually seeing that children can survive outside the womb at a younger age. But after viability, an abortion must still be permitted if a doctor deems necessary to protect the woman's physical, emotional, or psychological well-being and health, also considering the support that the woman has from her family and her age. So this is a largely subjective definition of health. This could mean pretty much anything. So this means that in our country, there's pretty much unlimited access to legal abortion up until the due date of the child. We just want to go over some abortion facts. And these facts I pulled from Guttmacher Institute, which is a research organization that was founded by Planned Parenthood. So it is a pro-choice research institute. But we just want to make sure that we have the most straightforward, unbiased facts, and that they're not leaning in any kind of agenda to try to cover up or dupe anything. This is just facts that are about abortion, and that we can understand the severity of this issue. So there have been 62 million abortions in the United States since Roe versus Wade in 1973. Abortion was the leading cause of death worldwide in 2019 at 42 million deaths. So deaths from HIV/AIDS, alcohol consumption, smoking, cancer, and suicide, all of those number of deaths put together still does not equal the amount of deaths that occurred from abortion in 2019. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in abortion, and the United States has the second highest abortion rate in the world. So women will get an abortion for numerous reasons. Some of the top reasons statistically are that they can't afford to have a child, they're not ready to be a mother, or that having a child wouldn't interfere with their career or education plans. So some of these various reasons combined equal 92% of abortions. And these are elective abortions, meaning that they're done on healthy mothers with healthy children for various reasons of a woman's choosing to terminate a pregnancy. Less than 1% of abortions are due to rape or incest, and 7% of abortions are performed because of health concerns for the mother or the baby.
And then we want to make an important note about the health of the mother. We are aware that there are very difficult circumstances that sometimes surround a pregnancy and that sometimes have to do with the health of the mother. But we want you to know that the health of the mother is always the number one priority for doctors, and that Abortion does not cure the illness of the mother. Abortion is the intentional termination of the pregnancy and isn't necessary to save the life of the mother. Killing the child does not automatically fix the problems that the mother may be having. However, if the mother receives medical treatment that unintentionally ends the life of the baby, that is not an abortion. So one example that I've often seen is that maybe a mom didn't know that she had cancer, advanced stage cancer, before she got pregnant. And now she's pregnant, and her doctor says that if she doesn't get chemotherapy, she will likely die very soon. It is okay for that mom to get chemotherapy, even though the baby will likely die from it. She is not getting chemotherapy with the intention of ending the life of her unborn child. It is a sad consequence of it, but it is not an abortion. The other thing is that the mom and the baby can often be separated when the mom's life is in danger. And this can be done by delivering the baby, not by killing them. So, as early as 22 weeks, a lot of babies can survive outside the womb now with all the medical advances we have. It does take a lot of care, but it is possible. And then in that case, the baby could survive and the mother could get the treatment that she needs. So that is what we ideally advocate for.
Just to put all of this into perspective, 1/3 of your generation is missing because of abortion.
And this brings us to the spiritual reality. So we spoke before about Genesis and the Garden of Eden, and that is the beginning of the Bible. And at the end of that story, God says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. And this sets up the struggle between humanity bringing life into the world in conjunction with God, and with Satan trying to destroy that life because he knows how valuable it is. And we see this until the end of the Bible in Revelation. And we see this in this particular passage from Revelation that says, and a great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth, in anguish for delivery. And another portent appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was about to bear a child, that he might devour her child when she brought it forth. So the imagery here, we can see a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Well, that sounds like many depictions of the Blessed Virgin Mary that I've seen. And the great red dragon does not sound like the serpent in Genesis. So we can see that from the beginning of the Bible to the end, Satan is out to destroy life coming from the woman.
Yeah, the enemy has always sought to destroy the woman's fertility, for he knew that through the womb of woman, the Son of God and the Savior of man would be brought into the world to defeat sin and death. Because the enemy is always trying to bring us to sin and to lead to our death. But Jesus, not only does he restore us to life in our earthly bodies and he heals, but he also calls us to eternal life, which is the ultimate offense against the enemy. And so we see that Mary is the new Eve to redeem God's children through an unplanned pregnancy, that through an unplanned pregnancy do we receive our salvation from Jesus. Mary's womb becomes the dwelling place of God, so God sets aside woman's womb as a sacred place. And the enemy wants to turn the womb from a place of life into a place of death, which is why it's so important that we advocate for the right to life for everybody, for the woman and her body, because her body is created by God and is so sacred, and for the life that she carries in it that God entrusts to her.
So this week we covered the church's teaching on pro-life, the historical backdrop for the legalization of birth control and abortion, and how our world has been affected. Next week, we will cover how to defend the pro-life position with scientific evidence, philosophical arguments, and how you can be an advocate for life. Because just like Kylie just talked about, we want to create a culture of life, especially in the United States where this is such a serious issue right now. So have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us.